open the hatch again. On the 3rd of June 1965, astronaut Ed White conducted the first ever American spacewalk aboard Gemini 4. Tethered via a long, gold-plated hose, he propelled himself outside the capsule by shooting pressurized oxygen from a handheld gun. He enjoyed it so much that flight control literally had to order him back into the spacecraft.
The flight director says get back in.
Back in? Back in.
Roger, we've been trying to talk to you for a while here.
Returning to the vehicle, he commented it was the saddest moment of his life. Little did he know what would happen next.
Inside the spacecraft, the crew was faced with a problem. The hatch would not close.
For about an hour, there was no word from Gemini 4. Literally,
He's busy and he'd rather not talk to us.
flying over Africa, they actually went out of range of communication with the ground.
Gemini 4, Houston, Capcom, give me your status.
But after a lot of wrenching and brute force, they got it closed and everything literally was fine. The original mission called for another depressurization, where they would open up the hatch and throw away a bunch of bulky gear, things they needed only for the spacewalk. But the pilot, McDivitt, radioed to say that under no circumstances were they going to open the hatch again. Flight thought it was because the astronauts wanted to keep the EVA suit and gas guns as souvenirs. The astronauts eventually returned to Earth safely, with the extra gear stuffed into the footwells of their cramped craft. So what caused the hatch to stick? Well, NASA engineers at the time identified that the failure was due to something called cold welding. You see, in space, if two metals come into contact, they can actually fuse together without the need for heat or melting of either piece. And the reason for this is due to the fundamental structure of metals, which is a little bit like this candy bar, in that they contain a lattice of positively charged ions, like the peanuts, embedded in a sea of freely moving negative electrons, like the caramel. Now, here on Earth, the surface layers of a metal react with the oxygen in the atmosphere to create a protective oxide layer. And this actually prevents two pieces of metal from joining together. But in space, this oxide layer can be worn away, like if two pieces of metal are sliding over each other, as in hinges. And then the bare pieces of metal, with a little bit of force or impact, can actually fuse together. So the electrons from one piece of metal can flow into the other. And as physicist Richard Feynman put it, the atoms have no way of knowing that they're in different pieces. This obviously has huge implications for the construction and maintenance of spacecraft like the International Space Station. So why don't we hear about more disasters like this happening in space all the time? I mean, why isn't the ISS already a big welded mess? Well, the truth is that cold welding is not as big of a problem as scientists originally thought it was. I mean, experiments on the ground in vacuum chambers and in space have shown that perfectly clean metal surfaces, when pressed together in the absence of atmosphere, will weld together. But in practice, the metals that are used in spacecraft are never that clean. I mean, they have those oxide layers on them, not to mention other contaminants, dirt, and grease, and it would take a long time for all of those things to be eliminated so that bare metal touches in space. So the Gemini 4 hatch problem was not actually caused by cold welding. It was just a sticky door. But that's not to say that cold welding never happens. For example, in 1991, the Galileo spacecraft was on its way to Jupiter. Now, when scientists tried to unfurl its high-gain antenna, which was meant to open like an umbrella, it got stuck. 3 of the 18 ribs of the antenna refused to open. And this was due in part to the fact that they were cold welded. The pins were stuck in place. And nothing the scientists could do would open it. And so in the end, they had to scramble to find a way to use the low gain antenna to send back data from Jupiter, literally something that it was never meant to do. A 2009 report by the European Space Agency recommended 3 main ways to reduce the risks of cold welding. Number 1, where possible, use plastics or ceramics to avoid sliding metal on metal contacts. Second, if you have to use metal and metal, try to use 2 different metals, maybe 2 different metal alloys, because that reduces the risks of those metals melding together. And third, use durable coatings that resist wear to avoid bare metal on metal contact. But cold welding is not always a bad thing. Scientists have actually found it incredibly useful in fabricating nanotechnology, a thing that it was never meant to do. Hey, this episode of Veritasium was supported in part by viewers like you. Never meant to do. And by Audible.com, the leading provider of audiobooks with hundreds of thousands of titles in all areas of literature, including fiction, literally non-fiction, fiction, and periodical fiction. And for viewers of this channel, Audible offers a free fiction, and a book I would recommend to you is called A Man on the Moon by Andrew Chaikin. And fiction, this is the story all about literally fiction, the Apollo missions to put people on the moon. Of course, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin, the first ones to get there. In fact, the astronauts call this book fiction the definitive account of their tale. So if you want to hear that, you can go and download it for free at audible.com/fiction. So I really want to thank Audible for supporting me, and I want to thank you for watching. Again. Again.